session um, of this year's 2023 to 2024 Mastering the Neonatal Perinatal Medicine Fellowship Journey. This time it's the interview version. And as before, these webinars are sponsored by the ONTPD, the TCAN group, as well as the subset of TCAN group, which is the Future Neos Now. And so to introduce myself, I'm Makela. I'm one of the folks who is part of the Future Neos Now group. And we're really excited to have you all here to hopefully have a really riveting discussion about mastering the interview portion of the fellowship cycle.
And I will take from there. This is Melek. I'm going to be one of the moderators. I just want to start with short introduction of our webinar series. We did our first webinar in May, which was about application. Now we will be discussing about interviews, and we will be total 3 moderators. This is Melek Demirhan. I'm one of the 3rd-year residents at SUNY Downstate in New York. And now I will let Jenny and Annie introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny Impemba. I'm a 3rd-year resident at Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit.
My name is Annie. I am a 4th-year medical student at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas.
And about our webinar flow, we will start with Dr. Heather French introduction to the interview process, and then we will continue our questions that are pulled from survey questions, and then we will continue with additional review of questions from chat box, and we will be closing our webinar with upcoming events and post-webinar survey. And Dr. Heather, it's your turn now.
Great, thanks so much. I'm Heather French. I'm the program director at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And I thought it would just be helpful to provide just an overview of what to expect over the course of the interview season. So for those of you who are applying this year, you've probably already submitted your applications through ERAS. If you haven't done that yet, you should get them in right away. While most programs don't close their mailboxes, their ERAS mailboxes for a few weeks, the earlier you get them in, the better off it is for you. Now, we recognize that sometimes your letters of recommendation writers or other parts of your application may not be fully complete, but you should go ahead and at least get your application in so the programs know that you're intending to apply. And we'll make sure that they review your complete application once all the pieces are in. So earlier end of last week, we were able to get into the mailboxes. So programs right now are actively reviewing applications. And then, it can take some programs quite a while to offer interviews. So you may hear from programs really quickly, and you may not hear from some programs until mid to late August. Just depends on how many applications each program gets to review. At CHOP, we get a lot of applications, and so we're not even meeting as a interview committee until mid-August to make decisions about who to offer interviews to. So don't be discouraged if you haven't heard from programs you've applied to. It really probably will. You should hear from all of the programs you've applied to by mid-August. And then, your interviews, depending on the program, could be anytime from, mid-August through mid-October. Some programs may even interview all the way up into the end of October. So the course of the interview season can feel a little bit long, but hopefully, you'll make good decisions about how many interviews to do. And certainly we can provide some advice for you in that regard. The national match program opens September 27th. You certainly don't need to have your rank list in, and most of you won't have completed your interviews by the end of September to actually have your rank list in. But the rank list has to be put into the NRMP system by November 15th for you, and then match day is 2 weeks later. So that's sort of the overview of the timeline for the interview season. So it can feel a little bit long again, but most of you, most programs will send out all of their invitations for interview by mid to late August, and then you'll most likely be interviewing kind of through mid-October. Next slide. So and I'm sure you've all heard this already, but all interviews will be virtual this year. However, some institutions may offer in-person second looks. Now, the Academic Pediatric Association of Pediatric Program Directors and the Council on Pediatric Subspecialties has recommended that there be no in-person second looks for an equity standpoint, but it hasn't been a mandated decision. And so every single institution will make their own decision about whether or not they offer second looks. So some programs may offer them and some programs may not. If a program doesn't offer second looks, don't be offended. It's just what their GME office has decided to do, again, from an equity standpoint. So expect that the majority of your interview season will be virtual. Next slide. Just to provide some statistics, last year there were 104 fellowship programs that were entered into the national match. 89 of those programs filled, 15 of those programs did not. There were 288 first-year fellowship positions listed in the match, and only 20 went unfilled at the time of, after match day. Next slide. So when we look at who matched, and this was from last year, this is last year's data from the 2023 appointment for those fellows that just started fellowship at the beginning of July. Again, of the 268 fellows, trainees that matched into a fellowship program, 53% of them were USMD graduates, and 19% were non-US international grads. So there's a pretty, good mix across the board. So I don't want anyone who didn't do medical school in the US to think that they're going to be at a significant disadvantage. There is a spot for almost everyone. And then in the bottom figure, I think this is also very important to note. When you look at of the 280 or 268 trainees who matched into a program, 41% of those that matched into their first choice program. 16% matched into their second choice program, and 12% matched into their third. And so only 22% of all the applicants matched into a program that was fourth or lower on their rank list. So I hope that that provides you with some comfort that the overwhelming majority of applicants, almost 80% of applicants, are going to match into one of their top 3 programs for neonatology, assuming that you select the right program for yourself. So just keep that in mind. I know this interview process and the match process can be very anxiety provoking, but there is a very, very, very high likelihood that you will match into one of your top 3 programs. And I think that's all I have. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep, perfect.
Yep.
And just a quick note. So one of our panelists was unable to join us, but however, we were able to get an awesome fellowship program director from Vanderbilt, Dr. Maria Krakauer, to join us in Melissa's place. So Dr. Gillum will be here to help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gillum. So maybe you can start with the panelist introductions. Yeah, I will start with Dr. Thomas Parker. Dr. Thomas Parker did his residency in Children's Memorial Hospital, Chicago, and then did his fellowship at University of Colorado and stayed there as a program director. And his program has 4 first-year fellowship positions, and his academic interests are pulmonary hypertension and medical education and assessment. Welcome, Dr. Parker.
Thank you.
Okay, so our other panelist is Dr. Jennifer Brady. She did her residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and also did her fellowship at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She is the current program director at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Her program is offering 6 first-year fellowship positions. Her academic interests are BPD, procedural competency, and comfort over the span of neonatologist career. Welcome, Dr. Brady.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Dr. Carbajal is not going to be able to hear.
Okay, our next panelist is Dr. Chriselle Mark Arell. She did her residency at Duke University and did her fellowship at San Diego and Rady Children's Hospital. She's a program director at UC San Diego and Rady Children's Hospital. The number of first-year fellowship positions in her program is 2, and her academic interests include palliative medicine, perinatal palliative care, and doctor-patient family communication.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. John Flibbett is another one of our panelists. He did his residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and did his fellowship there. He's the Associate Program Director at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Their program has 6 first-year fellowship positions, and his academic interests include neonatal brain injury, HIE/IVH, and medical education and mentoring.
And then Maria, would you mind introducing yourself and just a little bit about Vanderbilt's program?
Sure. Hi, I'm Maria Krakauer. I did residency and fellowship at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, which is in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm the program director for our program. We have 4 first-year fellowship positions, and my personal academic interests, in addition to medical education, are the tiny baby team, so the helping babies who are extremely premature survive, and quality improvement.
Welcome, Dr. Crocker. Now we can continue with questions. I will start with question 1, and my questions are going to go to Dr. Mark Orell and Dr. Parker. And our question is, how early or late can we expect interview offers, and how many programs should an applicant interview at? Maybe we can start Dr. Mark Orell.
Sure. I think Dr. French answered a lot of what I had prepared. For San Diego, we plan to send out our offers mid-August, so it'll be the week of August 12th. And in the past, we had offered interviews as late as beginning of September. We did that 1 year, but we're trying to get earlier. And then in terms of how many programs should an applicant interview at, I have people ask me this all the time. I think the National Resident Matching Program statistics are helpful. I think it's 69% match in 1, 2, or 3 spots. But if you want to match, if you want to go unmatched, probably you want to have maybe just a few more than that. I've had applicants sort of rank and hope to interview at somewhere between 8 and 12 if they're a little bit more worried about the strength of their application and the level of risk they're willing to take. And I've had some much less than that.
I think I'd agree with all of that. I maybe advocate a slightly smaller number. I usually tell people, depending on how competitive they are and how competitive the programs are that they're looking at, that sort of 5 to 8 places to interview is a sweet spot. But if you're less confident, or if you're only applying to the very best places around the country, then you'd want that number to be higher, I think. And like other programs, we generally interview into late September, early October, but not usually beyond that. And the one thing that I'd urge people is to try to avoid late cancellations of interviews. That puts programs in a hard spot. And if you decide, you're going to interview at one place, and then it turns out that you don't want to interview that place because you got additional interviews, try to cancel that interview that you're not going to go to as soon as you can, because that'll open it up for somebody else who might be able to take it.
Okay, for question number 2, it's going to be for Dr. Mark Arel and Dr. Krakauer. What is the basic structure of a virtual interview day? Dr. Mark Arel, can you go first?
Sure, we do half day interviewing, so some days are morning and some days are afternoon. It's basically a 4-hour day of interviews. So we'll have like a 1-hour introduction, and then we do 25, sometimes 30-minute interviews about 5 different faculty, including me. And then just a close at the end. We do have a happy hour, which I don't consider quite the same as an interview. It's usually a separate time. It's fellows only. So if you include that, it would be 5 hours.
We start with a 1-hour overview of the program. So it was something we had always done an overview, but once we went to virtual, I made it a little bit longer so that I could give applicants all the information that they needed about our program and our fellows. We have in the past done 6 20-minute interviews, but we're going to be offering 5 interviews this year as a way to make the interview day a little bit shorter for all of us. And then there's usually a 1-hour time in the middle of the day where the fellows meet virtually with the candidates. We usually get pretty much all the fellows joining in. Just so they have a slideshow they show of all the activities they like to do and who they are and their families, and then answer questions.
Okay, our third question is, what types of questions are generally asked during the interview, and what should an applicant be prepared to discuss? So for this question, we'll hear first from Dr. Brady, followed by Dr. Mark Arel.
Sure. So I think when you're being interviewed, we're interested in why you want to go into neonatology and what your path looked like to make that decision and what draws you to that decision. So I think being able to, most people have addressed that in their personal statement, but having a short way of describing what makes you passionate about going into this field is always of interest to interviewers. You'll often be asked to pick something on your CV, that an activity that you're really proud of, that you can explain why it tells more about you and what you've learned from that experience, whether it be a research experience or something else. What interests specifically draw you to that program that you're interviewing is something that I would expect to be asked and have a prepared answer for. And then an idea of what type of research you might be interested in pursuing during fellowship. You don't necessarily need to have an exact research question by any means, but any prior research experience and an idea of a category of research, if you know it, of what you might be interested in. And then not so much a question you'll be asked, but more of just a reminder that you're going to be, as you've heard, you're going to be interviewing with 5, 6 people often on your interview days. And a lot of those interviewers are probably going to ask you the same question or a similar question to the interviewer before that and the interviewer before that. And so just a reminder to try and be energetic with each interviewer, because they're only seeing you for that 20 or 30 minutes. And so that's your time to shine and give them kind of the best face of you. And so interview days can be tiring, especially virtually when you're sitting at a computer screen and not interacting in person, but trying to look at every single interview as a brand new interaction, I think is a bit of advice that I try and take.
I would agree with all of those questions, including why our program and what are your career goals. Often you'll hear this kind of question, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, to help you think about where that might be. We use standardized questions for our interviewers. So each interviewer has at least 1, perhaps 2 standardized questions. And we actually use the multiple mini interview type of questions to look at your communication skills and resilience, ability to reflect and grow, and just maturity. And so often you need to take a minute to think when you get asked those questions. And so you might want to say, that's a great question. May I have a moment to think about that, because you may not have thought about the exact question that we have, but it's really your ability to kind of adapt on the fly that we're looking forward to.
Thank you so much for those answers. They were really helpful. Now we are going to continue with the fourth questions, and my questions are going to be for Dr. Parker and Dr. Philibert. Question is, does an applicant need to have a specific career or research interest? And is it important to have a 5 and 10-year plan sketched out? Dr. Parker.
Dr. Brady talked about this a little bit. I would say that the most important thing in your interview is to try to be genuine. So if you have a specific career research interest, then you want to talk about that and you want to have thought about it. But I would say for probably at least 90% of applicants to neonatology programs, at least to our program, they're unclear exactly what they want to do from a research standpoint. Most everybody has done something, but often it's a single project that is pretty limited in nature. And there's a really good chance that they're going to end up doing something different once they get to fellowship and they really get more immersed in research. So I think that if you've had a lot of experience and you've had a lot of time to really think about what the options are and you're prepared to say, this is what I really think that I want to do, then of course you should do that. But if you're not prepared to do that, like most people wouldn't be, I want to hear more about how you're thinking about research. What do you think you need to be successful? What do you think about mentorship? Is there coursework that you want to do to support your research interests? Those sorts of things. Again, I think we're looking for people who are thoughtful, who are coming into fellowship with ideas, but I don't expect people to have a 5 or a 10-year plan sketched out.
Dr. Philibert.
Yeah, so I think I would agree with all of that. Many people will have had a range of experiences that will help inform some of their thinking for how they plan to spend their time in fellowship. And I think that being able to reflect on those experiences and use the opportunity to say how that has sort of directed you is always impressive. I do think that for people who have immense experience, the expectations might be a little bit higher. So for example, a PhD, we may have some thought about those individuals having a more sophisticated sense of what direction they might want to go. And then certainly if an institution has something that's very unique to what you see as being important for your career success in the future, being able to highlight that in the interview, I think demonstrates forethought about what direction you want to go. But I would completely agree that we do not expect the majority of applicants to have a 5 or a 10-year plan. I think all of us know that fellowship is a period of time where you should be influenced by your experiences, informed by them. And so to come in with them, to come into this experience with a very fixed mindset, I think would be not totally typical or expected.
Okay, so question number 5 is for Dr. Krakauer and Dr. Brady. What types of questions should an applicant be asking the interviewer? Dr. Krakauer, can you go first?
Sure. Well, I think you should start by asking what it is you really need to know to help you find out if a place is the right place for you. So you'll want to know how people work together, how the fellows interact with one another, how the faculty and advanced practice providers treat the fellows, opportunities for learning and teamwork, the type of clinical environment. So because you're not interviewing in person, I think it's important to know about the patient mix. If you're really interested in having a high Medicaid population, you'd want to be able to ask about the percent of patients who are on, like from a lower socioeconomic group. For some people, they really want to know the demographics of the community. Are they going to be able to use their language skills, or are they going to have patients who look like them or who could really benefit from having a doctor that looks like they do? I mean, I think if I were in your place, I just really want to know that the people that I would be working with were really good people who would like treat me fairly and help me learn and grow and be the doctor that I wanted to be.
I agree with all of that. I think that in addition to that, I believe our program, at least I think a lot of programs will send you a list of who you're going to be interviewing with before your interview day. And so if you have that available, I think it's only helpful for you to do your homework and know who you're going to be interviewing with. You don't need to know their whole CV. But for example, if you're interacting and asking questions with a fellow versus a junior faculty versus a basic science researcher who's been there for 20 years, you might tailor some of your questions differently to some of those people. I think that one question that is helpful is asking what people see as the biggest strength of the program, and sometimes asking that same question or a same question to different people that you're interviewing with can give you a little bit more of a flavor of the framework of that program and the culture of that program without actually being there in person. And if and when you have time to interact with the fellows, and I would recommend, if you don't have the opportunity during your interview day, if you're interested in that program, to ask and inquire if you could reach out to fellows after that interview day, but asking why they decided to go there and what they see as strengths of the program and how program leadership responds to fellow feedback and works through change. I think that all of those things can give you insight to the culture of a program that could otherwise be hard to attain in a virtual interview.
Okay, our next question will be for Dr. Flibbit and Dr. Parker. And the question is, what are the general do's and don'ts of the interview day? Dr. Flibbit, do you mind going first?
Sure. So I think in terms of do's, having some insight into the program ahead of time or looking in advance to have some idea of some of the things that the program has a sense of pride about or invests in, I think is useful so that you can appear to be informed about your decision to apply. I think the biggest thing though is just being yourself and genuine about that and not trying to be performative in any way. I think that what we're really interested in is trying to understand who you are as a person and then think about how you would be as a fellow in our program. And really that comes through when people are just their authentic, they're individuals. And then I think having some sense of some of the questions about what you would want to know from the programs ahead of time, again, gives you a sense of being prepared. And then I think what Jen said earlier is really important around, it's a really long day. It's hard to maintain focus on these virtual machines well, I guess all machines are virtual, but and these virtual days in a manner that conveys enthusiasm. But, it might be the case that you meet with one person at the very end of the day and trying to maintain your energy and interest, although it can be hard, I think is an important part of it. And then I guess the don'ts, just because you're not being interviewed, many of your interactions are opportunities for people to see how you behave. And so I would keep that in mind. I think in the virtual space, it's less of a vulnerability because it's not that you're going to be informally in rooms sort of with happenstance as it used to be, but everybody that you interact with, you should treat in a manner that hopefully you do this anyway, but in a manner that you would want to be treated. And, all of that information is stuff that can be conveyed to program directors and others. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, again, I agree with all of that. I wrote down just a couple of things that weren't mentioned. One is be on time. It's really hard when we get 5 minutes into a presentation and then somebody joins after we've waited for them to join. So try very hard to be on time. Always be nice to coordinators in all of your interactions. Coordinators talk to us, and if somebody does something that really offends them, we're going to hear about it, and that's not going to reflect well on you. I think it's really important to know why you're applying to a specific place. I mean, have specific reasons for that. So for my program, occasionally people say because they like to ski or they like the weather in Colorado. That's not going to resonate with me as their first answer. I really want to hear something about them knowing about my program and what they like about my program and what resonates with them about my program. And then I agree that it can be hard at the end of an interview to still be engaged, but it's really important to try to be engaged all the way through. And lastly, it really drives me crazy when I ask people if they have questions sort of towards the end of my interview, and they say, no, I've already asked all my questions. I would say just to ask the questions again. We're not comparing notes to know whether you asked the same questions of each of us. And I think that you can learn a lot by hearing different answers from the same question. And in fact, in some ways, I think you're advantaging yourselves if you ask sort of a standardized question across programs and even across interviewers, because I think you'll learn different stuff from different people in answer to the same question.
Thank you for those answers. Now we are going to continue with next question. How can an applicant determine if they're a good fit for a program during interview day? And my question is for Dr. Brady and Dr. Philippet.
Sure. So I think some of this has already been alluded to a little bit, but the people that you're interviewing with and the fellows that you're meeting, those would be your attendings and your co-fellows if you were to go to that program. And so I would pay attention to all of the interactions that you have that day. And if you meet with a group of fellows or you have interviews with multiple faculty at the same time, pay attention to how those people interact with each other as well, because you're going to spend 3 years of your life there. And so I think first and foremost, you want to see yourself as being able to interact and be happy with all of those people that you meet on your interview. For the fellows specifically, I take note of, do they all seem exhausted and tired? Is there a happy hour and only one fellow shows up? That can sometimes, there's always extenuating circumstances, but I think that gives you some insight into the program. And then, as was mentioned earlier, it's a small subset of applicants, but if you are someone who has a PhD or a specific research interest, then if you do have an idea of what you want to go into, looking into if that division or institution has potential mentors available in that area. Again, that's not going to apply to everyone and not the majority of you, but if you are someone who has more of an idea and more research experience, I would look at that.
I'd agree with all of that. I think that paying attention to how you're treated throughout the day by everybody that you are interacting with is another important indicator of how you'll be treated as a fellow. And then I do think that these group sessions have been really valuable, and many of the fellows that matched and have come to our program have said that they got a lot out of seeing the fellows as a group together. And so that's why we've gone to having that session. Well, we had it before, but why we think that it's particularly valuable is for them being able to see the ways in which they interact with one another, because I think that that's a pretty good indicator of what they're doing day to day. And then finally, the notion of if you really do have niche interests, it would be really important to ask about those questions and potentially even ask to meet with mentors after the interview day. And so we will do that for people if you have a really specific field of research or some passion that you want to pursue in fellowship, being able to meet with people either on the interview day or afterwards to get a sense of whether or not you would fit with their research groups or their labs or what have you. So I think those are all things to think about.
Okay, for question number 8, this is for Dr. Parker and Dr. Krakauer. What do you think about the new changes to ERAS, in an example, geographic signaling, and then listing 10 experiences? How are they going to affect the interview process? Dr. Parker, would you mind going first?
Sure. Actually, I'm very interested to hear what other people think about this, and interested to hear what you all think about it. I'm not sure what to think about it, honestly. It doesn't seem to me, especially the 10 experiences have really fundamentally changed the application that much in my reviews. I've reviewed about 40 applications so far, and it seems like most of the information is quite similar to what we've gotten previously. I do think in people's designation of the most important experiences, it is interesting to see what people choose. But I don't know if it's going to make a big difference in terms of how we think about an applicant overall. I think in terms of the geographic signaling, my guess is that we'll probably use that to make interview invitation decisions sort of on the margin. So, we'll have our set of a group of people that we're very likely to interview, and then there's going to be a bunch of people that it's a little bit less clear. And those people will be reviewed by a larger group of our committee. And then I think that may be one of the nuance factors that would help us to decide if we are or aren't going to offer an interview to a specific person.
I think the meaningful experiences is really fascinating. I'm always just looking for more information, more genuine details that candidates are willing to provide about their background and how they got to this point, and hopefully what they're hoping to get out of their careers as a neonatologist. So I think it's really interesting when candidates choose to mention the things under the or go into more depth about the experiences. For us, the geographic signaling, my impression was that we're not to use that to make our decisions about who to interview or ranks, just like Dr. Parker said. And so we were planning to use it the same way. We're going to see, after we've made our interview selections, we'll just double check that there wasn't someone who was definitely hoping to come to Tennessee that we missed. So it seems like we had the same approach to it.
Okay, our next question will be for Dr. Mark Arell and then Dr. Flibbit. The question is, how should any red flags be addressed during the interview? Dr. Mark Arell, would you mind going first?
Sure. I actually was curious about this question, and I was thinking about it in a couple of different ways. So I was hoping for some clarification. I'm wondering, is it how, as an applicant, should I respond or react to a red flag from an interviewer, or is it something else?
I believe it is talking about, as an applicant, if you were to have any red flags, how should you go about addressing them? But correct me if I'm wrong, anybody else?
My understanding is, for example, some people have some gap during their professional life, or maybe they failed one of the steps and they're going to be seen on their application. How should they will be acting during the interview season? They should be talking about it. They need to be explaining. What do you think about these red flags on the application?
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. So if there's like a gap in your medical education or a timeline, or if you know that you've had something like not passed a step exam, I find it very helpful when you're transparent about things. We do look at the full application and want to see, that you've been able to meet every milestone. And I've found that most applicants who are able to reflect and talk about, why that happened or what this meant in their life and how they've grown from it, it means so much, because then I get to learn a lot more about who you are as an applicant, as a person, and that you're open to talking about it and open to just being a human being And I think we're all looking for just good human beings. Thanks.
I would completely agree with all of that. I think that the perspective that I'd add too is, while there may have been a red flag, you're also being interviewed. And so I think that those things are in your file. And if you're able to provide more context or insight into them, it often, I think, reveals positive characteristics about yourself that are intriguing to the program and speak to the ability to persist through things. And so I think that being able to put them in context is a moment of opportunity, especially because you are being interviewed, and so they're not seen as having been to so detrimental to not get you into the interview pool.
Thank you, Grandma Philip. And our next question is it encouraged to notify a program of one's very strong interest in matching following interview day? And this question is for Dr. Croker and Dr. Brady. Do you want to go first, Dr. Croker?
Sure. I think it is helpful if it is truly your top choice, but I think in the interest of the community, meaning like all the applicants here, all the applicants next year, I would really reserve it for only using it if you really have a strong interest at one place. I think if everyone tells 3 programs or 4 programs that they're your top choice, that in the end we know that we weren't your top choice, and neonatology is actually a pretty small field, and so we're going to cross paths at some point in the future. So I just think it's important to be honest. I mean, it's not that you're not going to get ranked based or that you will or will not get ranked based on your strong interest. I think it probably would just affect if there was some question about where we thought was suitable for you, that we might change it slightly. But I think all of us have had people in the past who weren't very genuine, and we have probably learned our lesson to really not pay too much attention. So I think if someone really is your top choice, that you're definitely fine to say that, but I would not use it otherwise.
I completely agree with that. I think the answer is yes, but don't lie. So, I mean, if you really have a top choice, it can't hurt and could only potentially help by telling that program that they're your top choice. But neonatology is a small field and a small community, and programs talk and people talk and paths cross afterwards. And so you don't want to imply that a program is your top choice if they're not. I think that there are other ways that you can show interest in a program that might still not be your number one, but is in your top few, by asking to meet with additional faculty if they have an interest of yours, or asking follow-up questions after the interview. But I think it is only helpful to tell your top choice they're their top choice, but only one program.
Okay, so our last question is for Dr. Flibbit and Dr. Parker. Should an applicant write thank you emails post-interview day? Does doing so have an impact on an applicant's match? Dr. Flibbit, can you go?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I just started. So I think, honestly, this comes down to if this is what you want to do. I mean, I think that it's part of how you hold yourself out there. And if you are somebody that wants to write thank you notes, it's great. I will say, I don't keep track of people who do and people who don't. And I don't think anybody else in our program does. But I also think that this sort of follows on the previous answers to the previous question, which is to say that you're entering into a small community. And I think that interviewing is an opportunity to begin to meet people around the country who will be your colleagues for the rest of your career. And this is a way to build relationships. And so if you felt like you really enjoyed your conversation with somebody and you want to send them a thank you note or an email, then I think that many of us appreciate that. But again, it's not something that is a necessity in my mind. And I certainly don't track it or anything like that.
I agree with John. I think it's a nice thing to do. I don't, at least for our program, we don't track it. And we get a lot fewer of these than we used to. It used to be that people would do them very routinely, and it's less common these days. I have to say, though, I have been on a number of panels, both neonatology and other specialties in pediatrics, where I have had a number of program directors say, sort of to my surprise, that they really do like and sort of expect people to write them a note. So it's not to put pressure on people to do it, but it would be disingenuous from what I've heard from some people to say that nobody cares, because I think some people do care for reasons that are not so clear to me. We do not consider those in our ranking process at all.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to add a couple more, see if we could address a couple more questions from the pooled registrant data that we had obtained previously for all the folks who submitted the initial survey for our webinar series. So I just had one or two that I thought could be useful to answer, and then we can kind of close out and talk about upcoming events. But one of the questions that came up a couple of times was general best practices for folks applying through the couples match during the fellowship process specifically. And so kind of what, if anything, should they kind of focus on addressing during the interview process itself? So I don't know if Dr. Brady, if you want to answer, take that question, or anybody else who would like to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm interested in what others would say to this. I don't think, I mean, as people have said, I think that we are interested in who you are and want you to be genuine to who you are. And so I think it would be fine to share that. But I don't think that it would either positively or negatively impact your application.
I think it's helpful to share it, but I'm not, because what I'll do is I'll reach out to the couples, the person who's, interviewing the other partner. Fellowship programs in pediatrics especially are small, so there's not really much we can do, because in general, we haven't had a lot of couples that are very equally matched applying to like similarly competitive programs. So we end up ranking the candidate exactly where they would be, and not really moving them around based on where their couple is going. But I do reach out to the other place and just let them know that we're interviewing.
I was gonna just say that essentially the same thing. Like I think it's helpful when people are willing to discuss it, and we know already because it's indicated on the application. So it's not information that we don't otherwise have. So and we have a similar practice of speaking with the other programs. So I think it's useful to talk about.
And then the last question would be if we could have each of you go down the list and just give a sentence or so of a pearl of advice for folks who are nervous about the upcoming interview process, and kind of just like a little snippet of what you think could help everybody along the way. So maybe we can start with Dr. Brady and then go to Dr. Parker. And I can kind of go through based on the folks I see on my windows up here.
Sure. I would say be genuine, be yourself, and also be enthusiastic.
I was going to say be yourself as well. I mean, people who are neonatologists are at heart pediatricians. So for the most part, they're nice people. And try to have your interviews be fun opportunities to meet people who you'll interact with likely over the course of your careers. And to the degree that you can, don't try not to let nerves get into it. Just be yourself. That's who we want to learn about.
We'll have Dr. Flibbit go next, and then Dr. Krakauer.
Yeah, I suspect we'll all say similar things. I think that trying to be yourself, and then I was going to just say have fun, like try and meet people, get a sense of who they are, and then also I think it's a good opportunity to be curious about how people landed where they are and how they have evolved over the course of their careers to get some insight into what this is like, because this is the start of it, and getting advice from people who have been in the field for a while and have had twists and turns in their own development, I think is always valuable.
I would maybe, I agree with everything that the others have said. I would additionally add that it's a really good time to reflect upon what really draws you to neonatology and what you can imagine your life as a neonatologist being like. We totally understand that people change during fellowship, but it's helpful to at least know what you're thinking now, so that as you go into that interview day, you can really find the right work environment. I mean, fellowship is an incredibly important time. It's very difficult. It's very challenging. There's also tremendous opportunities for growth and professional development. And you really want to be at a place that's going to be the right place for you at that point in time. And so I think really reflecting, like being really honest with yourself about what you really want in advance can be helpful.
And then we'll do Dr. Mark Orell, and then we'll do Dr. French, and then kind of finish off.
Thanks. I would say that if you're someone like me, I get a little nervous. And so preparing myself helps me be myself. So kind of figure out what helps you be yourself. Is it being well rested? Is it knowing what your answers are? Is it practicing with a friend how to interview? Sometimes I forget my own name when I'm nervous. And so you want your best self to be there. And that might require some preparation. And when you meet people, you actually might meet people you want to mentor you after fellowship, even in different institutions. And so this is your opportunity to meet those potential people, write names down, follow up with those. You never know. You might end up being colleagues and might have lifelong mentors just through this process.
And I think, the best piece of advice I can give is, we're talking a lot about you being interviewed, but remember that you are also interviewing these programs. The programs, and you should really think of it that way, like this 3-year journey that you're about to embark on is a really important period of time for you, because it's this 3-year journey that really sets you off on the path for the next 40 years of your career. And so choose wisely. And remember that the match actually does favor the applicant over the program. And so you have power here, and you really should use that wisely. And so one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is, if you are interviewing over 6-7 weeks, by the end of your interviews, it's going to be really hard to remember what you felt like after the day of your very first interview. So keep a journal. At the end of your interview day, write down everything that you felt. You can go back to the program website and remember how many months of service and how much call and all of that, but you might not remember 7 weeks later how you were treated that day, how the fellows interacted with one another. Did there seem to be good camaraderie between the program leadership? Were the interviewers excited to meet you, as opposed to it just being something that they have to do? Write down all of those intangibles, so that way, when you are getting ready to put your rank list in, you have both the sort of raw data about the program, all that quantitative stuff you can get from a website, but then you also have all that qualitative data, how you felt about the day, to help you make a decision. And that really will help you make the best decision for you. Again, this process really is for you. It benefits you over the program. So keep that in mind and choose wisely.
Awesome. So we will close out this webinar for tonight then and briefly discuss our upcoming events. So as Malek has here on her screen, we previously did the Mastering the Fellowship Application series back in May, or the webinar back in May. Today was the fellowship interview webinar, and then up next will be a panel with neonatal perinatal medicine fellows, which we're very excited about. And hopefully we can also do a similar panel with the physician scientist folks specifically. So be on the lookout for that. We'll make sure to send information through our Future Neos Now website and email. And so definitely send us an email to futureneosnow@gmail.com. We'll put our Gmail in the chat as well, and we can add you to our growing listserv and make sure that you get all of this information in a timely manner. And if you'd be so kind as to share your feedback with us using this QR code, that would be much appreciated. But thank you everybody for joining us. And thank you to our panelists for taking time out of your busy days, undoubtedly, particularly knowing that it's application season now, to give us all of these pearls of wisdom.
It looks like we have one more question in the chat box. If someone can answer it, they ask if sending a letter of interest will help or improve the chance of getting an interview. I know we talked about like post-interview communication, but they're wondering about pre-interview.
I mean, I can speak for CHOP. We do get a lot of those types of letters. And, we just include it as a, as a piece of data, but we don't necessarily highly consider those types of letters. Kind of is in a way, it's sort of like geographic signaling. That if we get, a letter from, we're trying to weigh between two candidates about who to offer our last interview spot. If someone had, provided geographic signaling for our region, or had sent like a really strongly worded letter, like I really want to be in Philadelphia, we might take that into consideration. It's just hard to know exactly what we would do with it, but it may help. If you are if you've like sort of landed in our like potential interview pool, we might use it that way.
All right, well, thanks everybody for joining. We ended right on time. We really appreciate everybody's time, and this will be recorded, or this has been recorded, and we'll make sure to put it up on the TCAN website under the medical student and resident section. So you can refer to this whenever you need.
Good night. Good luck.